Wheel of Genre, the show for viewers who have been to the moon and know for a fact it's not cheese. Right now we're reading the anthology Dangerous Visions by Harlan Ellison. 33, 36, a lot of stories in here.
Just keeps
and
going.
we're reading them all. Yeah, we're reading them all. Right now we are reading Howard Rodman's The Man Who Went to the Moon twice. I'm Zach. This week I'm interested in what fables and fairy tales, what place they have within science fiction, if any.
Oh, I'm Bob. I'm very interested in that question too, Zach. I think that's a great question. I'm interested too in nostalgia again. In our last episode, we talked about, does science fiction need a cozy feeling, or looking back at glorious days? Does it need a golden age, or can we abandon it completely? And I think here, I'm really interested to see what you think about this story, because I'm wondering, why is this story written? Why is it part of Dangerous Visions? What do you think? Do you like this story, or are you on the fence about it? How do you feel about this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Do I like this story? Because the answer I would give you would change depending on how far along in the story I've read. At first, I thought it was so uncanny. Like, the story tells, so this kid, he gets up in a balloon, he sees an eagle, the eagle dies, he goes all the way up to the moon, he comes back down, he's greeted like a hero, his parents are in awe of him, and it's just so bizarre and so weirdly underwritten, I thought. I was like, I don't know what this is doing here. I don't know if I like this. I don't know why. Like, is this like a children's story? And actually, I'll give you an example of one of the notes I took. His perplexing family dynamics, which is, after this child comes back from the moon, his father says, "Been a big day for you," Marshall's pa said. "I guess you'd better go to bed now," Marshall's ma said. "Might be," Marshall's pa went on, talking his thinking out loud. "Might be you'll turn out to be a big explorer time to come." Marshall looked at his ma, saw her fear that her boy would turn out to be a gadabout. He answered for his mother's benefit, "I'll tell you, Pa, seems more likely I'd just settle down now and stay put." Of course, he winked at his father to show him that maybe he was right at that. And it's like this family dynamic where a child goes to the moon and comes back, and all the town gathers, the mayor's there, everyone greets him, and the dad's like, "Well, you might be a big explorer someday." And, and the mom worries. And this dynamic where a child is like deceiving the mom and winking at the dad at the same time. It's almost like something out of The Simpsons, or I don't know. I found it so implausible and so like icky weird. Just up to that point in the story, up to the point where it's just talking about the childhood. What was your emotional reaction to it?
You're right. It does feel strange. You're wondering, is this a children's story? What's going to happen here? It reminds me a lot when we read The Little Prince, where it is not necessarily, it's not science fiction, but there's something going on that is a little bit fantasy, a little bit fairy tale, a little bit kid's story, and a little bit adult story. So this story is similar. I like when it transitions a lot, because after the boy has been famous, everything goes great. Even the horse and the chicken look at him, and everyone takes pictures of him while he's a celebrity. I think 80 years later, he's almost 95, 96. He's very old at this point. And he's going around through town. No one seems to care about him being on the moon. He mentions it to a few people. He goes to get his hair cut, and he says, "Yeah, I've been to the moon." And they say, "Wow, cool."
Yeah.
They don't care at all. No one cares. He goes to the moon again, he claims. I don't know. We don't really find out if that's true or not. But he starts telling people, "I have been to the moon again." Again, no one cares. No one cares at all. It's completely old hat. Finally, he bumps into a kid, and he tells the kid, "Look, I've been to the moon twice." The kid says, "Wow, incredible." The kid says, "Hey, wait, look, I'm going to go get my best friend. We're going to come meet you, because this is incredible. We've never met anybody who's been to the moon once, let alone twice. Wow." So they come back. They go to this old man's house. The old man doesn't answer his door. These two kids walk in because he says, "Well, he's such a friendly guy. Don't worry. We're going to walk into his house." And he's dead. they were too late. They don't get to meet, she doesn't get to meet the man who's been to the moon twice. People come in. Finally, people care again. They have a little kind of funeral service. It's a repeat of what we've seen before, and it feels like a fairy tale where you revisit the same scene more than once. But it takes a complete twist from that going high up in the balloon, this fantasy, now down to earth again, and becomes very dark. Well, not necessarily dark, but it's a sad ending.
Yeah.
Why did you...
Do they care again? Because the story is told, I don't want to say through the perspective of this person, but he's definitely like the perspectival character. And then after he dies, the story continues on. So it's like, okay, my thinking is I couldn't help but think that the entire first part of this was a fantasy of our main character. When I was a child, like maybe the truth is that he held onto a couple balloons and it lifted him a foot in the air before people... before he let go or something like that. But then the tall tale kind of spins until, he went to the moon. He saw an eagle. He was the hero of town. It turns into the one event spirals into a whole mythology even. And when you read the first part, you need to have the person who's telling that story, which I took to be this kid, Marshall, as an adult telling it, or thinking back to his youth. But then, once he dies, don't we have a kind of return to fantasy with the horse peeking his head through the window and the chickens coming in? Mm-hmm. I don't know. It makes me feel like we have a new Imagineer. And maybe it's these new kids, when the old man died, the horse came through and the chickens came in, I don't know. What do you make of this narration?
I like this idea of the new generation, and I think the narration is very interesting and intentional. Howard, I think, wants to. He tells us in the conclusion or the postscript. He says, I wanted to make a fairy tale, and he has a very specific reason for doing that, and we should talk about that soon. But I think the way that he does it is, yes, it's totally fantastical. I went up in a balloon. I went to the moon. A horse and a chicken come into the house to watch me because they're so proud of me for going to the moon. Then everything in the middle is very boring. Not that the story gets that boring, but it's all just regular. So he goes and gets his hair cut.
Yeah.
What is more realistic than having to go and get your hair cut? And he's so... just no one wants to listen to his fantastical stories at all. They just want to talk about regular haircut stuff, real life stuff. Then you're right.
He doesn't get along with people so much that he pretends to be asleep in the barber chair. I thought it was such a good detail.
Yeah.
And so
very sad
counter the tone of everything else,
Yeah, he does it deliberately to hear if they're going to mock him or not, And he gets enraged when they say, no one cares about that. The old man's telling me some crummy story. Like you said earlier, maybe he just imagined it. It's a tall tale. They don't believe it. They don't care. And he hears that and he's outraged. He throws the towel down and he goes. But then it does become fantastical again. They care because someone has died. So people have to come and pay attention to him. So they don't care about the moon at all. Just the kids did. But, and they say, I think this is really important. They say that because now people go to Mars all the time. So no one cares about the moon at all. But I like this idea. Why do you think there are Imagineers now? What do you think about these two kids? Are they going to carry on this tradition of believing in something or telling tall tales or dreaming about going to Mars? Are they going to go to Mars or do they believe in his nostalgia of the moon?
Yeah. So I guess to back up, yes. I mean, I think the position that they are in the story of being kids in the same way that this Marshall guy was a kid when he himself believed that he went to the moon, whether he did or not, he believed he went to the moon, puts them in a position to where they're the new torchbearers of this kind of fancy, this kind of Imagineering spirit. But that quote that you said, ending the story, final paragraph, and this is just like the last story we read where you get a whopper for a final paragraph that kind of spins everything on its head a little bit. This one was, that was the day the Mars rocket went on a regular 3-a-day schedule. Hardly anyone went to the moon at all anymore. There wasn't enough to see. So they got people going to space 3 times a day. It's regular. It's old hat. I guess I wonder if the author is so pessimistic as to think that when we start going to Mars 3 times a day, people will no longer have dreams. You know what I mean? Like, will we long for a day when we just thought about the moon? I think it's quite the opposite. I think once we start going to Mars 3 times a day, people will idolize Jupiter. People will be like, oh, I can't wait till we get to Jupiter. I just think there's a strain of pessimism here that I don't quite buy.
Well, I think Howard would agree with your point. I don't think that he's pessimistic here. I think he also thinks, oh, we're going to start really not idolizing, but really loving the idea of going to Jupiter. I think you're 100% right. And the kids, when they first appear, we can see some evidence there because the boy runs over and pretends he's riding a horse. He is just as imaginative as Howard might have been. I think he probably did go to the moon, but we're jumped into fairy tale land again because it says Howard was interrupted by a little boy who came running up from behind, pretending to gallop and hitting himself on the rump as if he were a horse. So this kid is all about fantasy. It's very funny, this little scene. But what Howard says about why he wrote this in the afterword, I really thought was great. He says, I wanted to write this because of my father, and my father who used to think the phonograph was the most amazing thing. And when he told me the stories about it, his face would be transformed as if he was back there listening to it, listening to sounds transferred to him that were recorded by a machine, listening to that come alive. And he felt like, wow, I don't get it as a kid. I don't really get why that is impressive. It's just a machine. I've seen phonographs before. Now we have a radio. Why are you showing me a phonograph? But he says, quote, this particular story came out of a sudden, strongly personal understanding of certain aspects of my father's life. The enormous changes which took place in history of his time, technological developments beyond dreaming when he was a boy. And he says that his father talked about all of these changes. He flew on an airplane for the first time. But, and I think this is a very interesting science fiction element, he says, within an incredibly short time, the mystery and the miracle were lost, or the marvel was gone. He says that the sweep of modern history seems to have a feeling of wonder until you can no longer wonder or feel that change was marvelous. We look at the moon landing at this point. Everyone there is looking at the moon landing and they're saying, who cares? But for everyone who experienced it, that was the most amazing thing that had ever happened. Now the people going to Mars, like you said, people are going to look back at that and say, who cares? It's just Mars. We're going to Jupiter now. That is the real amazing thing. And not just for the experience of people dealing with technology, but I think for science fiction, it has to be novel. These science fiction stories have to outdo each other. They have to be something so new that other stories haven't done it before. And we saw in the last one where people are indulging in nostalgia to the point it's their folly. They become cavemen because they're so obsessed with nostalgia. Here, it's a little more realistic in how we treat science fiction. It has to be new or I just don't care.
Yeah, somehow this story, which on the face of it is much more childlike and much more fabulistic and much more fairy tale-esque, manages to be much more emotionally poignant than I think almost any other story we've read in this collection.
Maybe so. I think fairy tales always hit you in a certain way because they do kind of make you question it's a relationship between your own dreams and then the story that you're reading. It does hit you in a certain way. And the idea of his relationship with his father and seeing, wow, I just don't get what my father was on about. I don't get why he was into the phonograph. That does hit you.
Yeah.
What do you think, though? Because the introduction, this is coming after, in Dangerous Visions, where we have an introduction to part 2, and Harlan Ellison is reflecting on some of the impact of Dangerous Visions. So this story feels very different, like the last story did too. This feels especially different because it's cute. The other stories haven't been cute at all. And I think this is the first time we've seen regular kids who aren't mass murderers. Is this story.
Or mass murdered.
Or mass murdered. Yeah, it's just been a gore fest through this. But what do you think of Harlan Ellison's claims when he says all of this stuff at the beginning in the transition between book 1 and book 2, when he says, if you thought Dangerous Visions wasn't going to be important, just look at all of the mommies and the scoutmasters and the teachers demanding that they take it out of the libraries, that they burn the books, that it's an evil book. It's a huge success. And then he says, too, that big-time writers like Fred Pohl are saying that new wave is the new thing. He starts publishing his own new wave anthology. So he's really saying like it's successful, and it's successful because there's such a intense, vitriolic, I guess, reaction against Dangerous Visions. What do you think of that? Hey, this book is really loud and angry, and then fairy tale.
Yeah, that was a fun
experience.
That was a fun contrast. I think I was too caught up trying to evaluate kind of the truth claim, or maybe like the truth values, the values he was using to make his claim, to actually like dwell too hard on the contrast and the tone between what he's saying and what came before. But I thought the idea that like, oh, look how many people want to ban my book. That's a sign of its success. I was like, I feel like that value system says more about Harlan Ellison than anything else. I know I made a similar claim 2 or 3 episodes ago when I was talking about his divorce rate, but like just the idea that like success for him is that people have been outraged and their feathers have been ruffled. And that is equivalent, not just to like financial success, but like that's equivalent to artistic success. That's equivalent to merit. And I think that's like a scale that I wouldn't necessarily subscribe to. Maybe when I was like 14 years old, possibly, but I do wonder if this anthology has front loaded the most violent and I guess you could say deplorable writing into the first part of it. Yeah. And if this is maybe a trend towards exploring different feelings, spaces, moods.
Could be. Nostalgic moods, fairy tale moods. They also call it the red shift as source material for astronomical science fiction stories. So yeah, there is a lot of self-aggrandizing for this. But I mean, big important books do cause things like this. I don't know if Dangerous Visions is really as important as some of those books. But, when the first English translation of the Bible came out, there's Sir Thomas More is going around burning down bookstores, hanging people, burning people, get this out of here. So, it's fair to say, wow, our book has made people react a lot. It could make a revolution, could start a big change. And it did, allegedly, for science fiction. So it has been important for getting us to this new wave of science fiction. There's something that I thought was so interesting I'd never, ever heard before. But Howard was also involved in, I guess, a collection of essays, or maybe just science fiction stories. But I think it's called Goodbye, Fantastic Venus. And apparently, our old idea of Venus, we thought that it was full. We thought that it was full of trees. A prehistoric planet. Maybe dinosaurs were there, but it was this extremely green, lush planet. And then we got I don't remember which satellite, but we got telescopic. We got satellite pictures, and then we could find out that it was not at all like that. So they wrote this whole thing that was saying, "Wow, I feel so bad." Or think about the fantastic days of the fantastic Venus. That itself is nostalgic. It's like people's lamenting Pluto being banished from the solar system.
I mean, I love the idea.
Interesting thing. These guys love.
I love the idea that
fantastic Venus.
In Earth, as you get to warmer and warmer climates, it's going to be jungles, rainforests, et cetera, et cetera. So Venus is closer to the sun, so therefore it must be a jungle planet. It's an idea that tickles the soul for sure.
It's a fun one. Zach, I have one more question. Sorry about the Fantastic Venus question, but I have one more question. Harlan Ellison claims this, and I do not believe it at all, but I thought it was a very interesting, bold claim to make when he's introducing Book 2 of Dangerous Visions. He says, look, in the original TOC, in the original table of contents, we had William Burroughs, Thomas Pynchon, Alan Stiltoe, Terry Southern, Thomas Berger, and Kingsley Amis. They were all going to be in this book. And it sounds like they backed out. He just doesn't really say, but it sounds like Harlan Ellison just thought they would send something to his book. But maybe called them and they didn't answer. Well,
yeah, and he says, and we ended up with Howard Rodman, or we ended up Was it Howard
This
Rodman or
putz.
was it the guy before this? We ended up with one of these guys, and we're all
Howard
the better
Rodman,
for
Howard
it.
Rodman, yeah.
Yeah, and I was just
Yeah.
like, oh, what a weird, like everything, all of these introductions feel so backhanded for some reason. I don't
Yes,
know
they do,
why.
for sure. We read the one about the Malley system where the author, all he says is she's a great author who's really old, and also it's amazing that she can be so old and still write, and her writing's so good even though she's old.
Yeah, I don't know. The whole tone is so bizarre, but it makes me wonder if we'll ever actually read an anthology front to back again. You know what I mean? It's fun.
Oh, yeah.
I'm really thankful for the perspective on this era of science fiction that it's lending, but it's also just kind of like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah, stick with us if you're listening. We got a long ways to go, but we're not going to give up. It's the stories have not been my favorite stories, but it's very interesting looking at them and seeing how they're supposed to be fit into this deliberate revolution, where these science fiction authors say, "Look, we're tired of optimism. We don't want optimism anymore." And now they're going to push these stories to create something new. So that is very exciting, even though they are somewhat juvenile. They are at the juvenile stage of this movement. So it makes sense that they're going to be somewhat not quite formed yet.
Well, and I think it's also really interesting because this is right around the time that people would say things like, science fiction is for kids. Oh, the golden age of science fiction is about 13 years old. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it has a reputation at this time of not being serious literature. And I feel like in our time, in the 2000s, there's science fiction is pretty respected. I mean, between Dune, Three Body Problem,
It's also used
2001
in
is
everything.
space.
Well, it's also used everywhere. I mean, Everything Everywhere All at Once is science fiction, but it's not really. It's just lots of these high art pieces or pieces that are getting the awards are using science fiction however they want. So it feels like it's very much in the literary scene now.
Yeah. But I think at this time, so what I mean is that we don't view science, like when we hear people say, "Oh, science fiction is for children," it immediately feels wrong to us. It feels like, well, what about Tenet? What about Inception? But if you look at the era that people were reading when they came up with this opinion, which would be Golden Age and stuff, around the time of this anthology, I think that I'm not saying they're right, but I'm saying there's more merit to what they're saying when they form that opinion, if this is the material that they're working with. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing where we go with this. And I think we have some really big name authors coming up. So, a lot,
Philip K. Dick
down
is
the
next.
road. Philip K. Dick. Yeah. One of our favorites. So onward. Talk to you later, Bob.
See you, Zach. Talk to you later, Zach.